Could Alex Murdaugh get a new trial? A new motion filed by his defense teams lays out some pretty damning evidence against the court's own clerk alleging jury tampering.
Jurors must be free from outside influences and must decide the case solely on the evidence presented in the courtroom.
We're breaking down the many times Miss Becky allegedly misled and even outright lied to jurors and the court in the supposed pursuit of finding Alex Murdaugh guilty. Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. And welcome everybody to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, one of the biggest cases of the year and one of the most infamous characters in true crime history could be starting all over again. Alex Murdaugh's defense attorneys filed a motion for a new trial citing jury tampering. The new filing points the finger at the clerk of the court, Rebecca Hill, known to many as Miss Becky. They accuse her of jury tampering. The motion claims that Hill instructed jurors that Alex Murdaugh couldn't be trusted and was likely guilty. Alex Murdaugh was convicted in March of this year for killing his wife Maggie and son Paul on their South Carolina estate. The once trusted and well-known attorney took the stand in his own defense, proclaiming his love for Maggie and Paul, but after weeks of testimony and evidence, it took the jury only 3 hours to convict him. Murdaugh is currently serving life in prison, but his defense team hopes to turn all that around with a new trial. In their motion, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin provide multiple examples of Miss Becky's allegedly inappropriate behavior. The motion states that Rebecca Hill instructed jurors not to be misled by evidence presented in Mr. Murdaugh's defense. She told the jurors not to be fooled by Mr. Murdaugh's testimony in his own defense. She also allegedly told a juror not to question the fact that the murder weapons have never been found, and even indicated to the jury that if they didn't come back with a quick verdict, they'd all have to be taken to a hotel for the night, even though no one brought an overnight bag. Now, Rebecca Hill went on to write a book about the trial, which was released in August. The attorney spoke in front of the South Carolina Court of Appeals on Tuesday and talked about another strange move by the clerk.
One of the things we heard was once the jury went out, even though there were 6 smokers and they were given smoke breaks during the entire trial, once the jury went out, they were told no more smoke breaks. No, you're not, you people that want nicotine, you're going to have to get a verdict first. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. Now, that indicates something, and the court would be the one to communicate that. Why? So, a bunch of folks told us stuff that appeared to be inconsequential, but in the total context indicated to us that what we've put in this petition about the clerk is credible, and based on sworn testimony from 2 jurors, and we interviewed a third. My paralegal, Holly Miller, has given you an affidavit, or filed an affidavit on what she told us. A lot of these folks just don't want to get involved, but they're going to be involved if we get a hearing, because each and every one of them is going to have to testify in an open court before you as to what happened and what didn't happen.
Pretty unbelievable. Let's talk about it. Joined right now by my legal analysts, my co-hosts, Brian Buckmeyer, Terry Austin. Brian, I'll start with you. Reminds me a little bit of the Scott Peterson case. What does the defense have to do in order to get a new trial for Alex Murdaugh?
So it's interesting in terms of the presumption here, because we're so used to the presumption of innocence, which the prosecution can then overturn. But here, if the defense can simply prove the allegations that they have in their filings, because they have 2 affidavits right directly from jurors, and one from I heard that there was some sort of complication as to getting in the affidavit, so let's just call it 2.5, 3. If all those allegations are true, there's a presumption of prejudice that the prosecution now has to overcome, and that's a tough road to hoe, in the sense that they now have to show that this was harmless, that telling smokers you're not going to get a break, and maybe that's why they came back in 3 hours, telling them all this different information about forget about this, forget about that, he's a liar, that was harmless. I don't think that's going to be easy for them to prove, and that could have this case reversed.
Can we talk about Rebecca Hill for a second, Terry? If all of this is true, is she liable now, potentially liable for both state and federal crimes?
Absolutely. She's in a lot of trouble, and in fact, she could have ethics bringing cases against her. She could actually have to go before the ethics committee. But I mean, worse than that, from a criminal perspective, she could go to jail for 10 years and she could be fined for misconduct, for jury tampering, what she's being accused of doing here. What the petition is stating, all of the affidavits that Brian is talking about, there are 2 affidavits. There was a third affidavit by the law clerk, by the paralegal who actually talked to a third juror. But the point is, if in fact Hill did all the things that are alleged in these petitions, if she said you can't have smoke breaks, if she said you're going to stay overnight, if she essentially said don't believe Alex Murdaugh, she is jury tampering and she could go to jail.
Real quick, is it also a violation of federal law because you're violating his constitutional rights?
She's a state actor who's elected, and this would be just similar to like an officer killing someone and depriving them. It's a Sixth Amendment right to an impartial jury.
It is quite the allegation. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily. We're not done talking about Alex Murdaugh's chances for a new trial. We're taking a deep dive into a Facebook post that eventually led to a juror being dismissed. Did that post even really exist? And did Miss Becky orchestrate it to her own advantage? Stay with us. And welcome back to Law&Crime Daily, everybody. So we're taking a deep dive into the motion filed by Alex Murdaugh's defense team seeking a new trial. Murdaugh was convicted of gunning down his wife and son in South Carolina. He has maintained his innocence, but that motion accuses the clerk of court, Rebecca Hill, of improperly tampering with the jury and even misrepresenting information to the judge to get a juror tossed off the case, all in a seeming effort to ensure that Murdaugh would be found guilty. We're going to get into that second part, and I want you to stick with me here because it's a little complicated. So first, the day after Alex Murdaugh finished testifying in his own defense, Hill, known to many as Miss Becky, reportedly saw a Facebook post that hinted that one of the jurors might be talking to people outside the court. When the judge asked to see the post, she couldn't find it. But another employee found an apology posted in its place. That post was from before Murdaugh testified. Miss Becky believed that the post was written by the ex-husband of her juror. She even reportedly went so far as to confront that juror alone in her office, accusing her of discussing the case with her ex while she was drunk. Now, the juror denied that, saying she hadn't been or hadn't seen her husband in 10 years. The clerk told the juror that she had sent law enforcement to the man's home, and he confirmed everything, but a sworn affidavit from the ex says that never happened. That juror ended up being dismissed and replaced by an alternate. Turns out the apology was posted by someone else with the same name as the ex. The defense alleges that Miss Becky knew that and intentionally misled the court. Brian, what allegations, against the clerk here, Miss Hill, what stood out to you the most about that?
It was the fact that the Facebook person we're talking about is Timothy Stone. The husband, similar name, goes by Tim Stone on Facebook. The fact that Timothy Stone you can see the picture of him on his profile, and according to the affidavit from Juror 785, she showed a picture of her ex-husband to the clerk. And let's take a step back. This is not a clerk's job. It's not a clerk's job to question a juror as to what they saw, what they didn't see, sending officers to their home to question whether or not they tampered or were tampered with. This is outside the realm of what she should be doing altogether. This is supposed to happen, as we've all seen, in front of the judge with both parties there. So the fact that this even came up, yet alone the details that we're hearing, is bizarre to me, and why she has a job is beyond me, and we should be reevaluating not only this case, but every other case she touched.
I was just thinking that, let's say, for example, Terry, the court says, not going to order a new evidentiary hearing, there's no new trial granted. What happens with his appeal?
I think there will be a new trial granted, but even if that doesn't happen, I think there's a very good chance that there will be an appeal that is successful. One of the grounds, the most promising, is the fact that those financial crimes were admitted. You may recall that. And the judge said, look, this is, 403, you have to show that it has nothing to do with character, it has to do with motive or plan, and that's how you get it in. And the judge agreed that it should come in because it has to do with the motive. But there was so much, Jesse. It was just one crime after another that it did affect his character. People, meaning the jury, had to look at him and say, you know, something is wrong with you. You are a liar. You probably are lying about, you know, what happened with Maggie and Paul. And so I do think they have a decent ground for appeal there.
You know, it's interesting to think about. If he is granted a new trial and they can get a judge, a different judge, who maybe will not allow the financial crimes into evidence, then we're dealing with a whole different ball game.